Hi, everybody. It's good to see some familiar names, some old friends, some new friends. My name is Zhang Mei, and this is our 77th event. As you may know, we started this whole series when COVID started. We really tried to use this as a way, find a way to break down barriers when no one could travel. And we owe our speakers, our experts, our guides and lecturers many, many thanks for making this possible. But today I want to take a particular moment to thank all of you for giving us your time for attending these sessions. And you are really the reason why we keep doing these events. And I know with the shots, the jabs in the arms, everybody's life is getting busier and busier. So we are extremely, extremely honored that you used to take the time to join us. So thank you. Today, we will talk about National Geographic Society in China. And you can see on the screen with us is an amazing guest, amazing speaker, Jim Harkness, my old friend. Now, I say that because I first met Jim about, 20 years ago in Beijing. And he was, Beijing was this cold, gloomy winter day, but Jim was as chirpy as ever because we were going birding. And that was like Jim in his elements, in China, in nature. That was sort of like the place of heaven for you, almost, I felt. And let me go back in history and cover Jim's background a little bit. So Jim Harkness's China journey began when he was mere 14-year-old and when he was chosen to join the first US high school student delegation to visit China. And so it's safe to say that his interest in the country started then there. And then Jim studied Chinese, the language, and wildlife ecology at the University of Wisconsin, was then asked by the International Crane Foundation to help initiate field work in China. At that time, all of us knew China wasn't quite that open. In any event, ICF sent Jim to Tibet to survey the rare black-necked cranes. What a beautiful, beautiful place and subject to study. So Jim went on to get his master's degree from Cornell before becoming the coordinator of the American Zoo Association Giant Panda Conservation Action Plan. And he also worked for the Ford Foundation in China before becoming the chief representative of WWF China. And in 2006, he returned to the US. Since 2019, Jim has been China country director at the National Geographic Society, which is the subject of discussion today. So just a few words on logistics. Jim will go through about 20 minutes and give us a background of NGS China engagement with China. So I was wondering whether that's 150 years or something like that. We'll learn more. And then I will start off with a couple of questions. We have a few pre-submitted questions we'll get to. If you have any questions, please start putting them in chat box, in the Q&A box. We'll try to get to as many as we can. So Jim, thank you so much. I hand the mic over to you. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Let me see if I can remember how this works.
Don't worry.
Oh, I'm doing it wrong.
Is it share, but present?
There we are.
Beautiful.
How's that look?
Looks great.
All right. Thanks so much, Zhang. Thanks so much, Zhang Mei. It's really a pleasure. I think it's more like 25 years that we've known each other, and you are, of course, completely unchanged. It's lovely to see you again. It's probably been 5 or 10 years since the last time we got together for whether it was birding or dinner or what. But I'm also very excited to have an opportunity to meet some of the WildChina community and talk to you a little bit about the history of the National Geographic Society in China. This timeline shows sort of the broad sweep of National Geographic's history in China. We've invested over $10 million in grant funding for work in the country since our very first grant was given in 1903. You'll notice a couple of things from this timeline. the first grant was just 15 years after National Geographic Society was founded in 1888. And it was made at a time when China was not the People's Republic or even the Republic of China, but the Great Qing Empire. Another thing you'll notice, which I'm very sorry to admit, is that it took 80 years from our first grant in China to our first grant to an actual Chinese citizen. You know, in the late 19th century and early 20th century, it was a colonial era, an era of imperialism when the idea of science and exploration was very much dominated by the notion of, you know, white men going off to exotic lands to do exploration. And National Geographic was very much part of that narrative of the world. And I'm happy to say that we've moved away from that in recent decades, but that's really the way things looked in the first period that we were in China. Another thing you might notice is that there's a big gap between about 1949 and the 1980s. And as many of you can probably guess, you know, that was the period after the Chinese Revolution when foreign organizations were not allowed in the country for a lengthy period of time. So there were really, you know, two main periods that I'll be talking about in National Geographic's relationship with China: the period before the revolution and the period after Mao's death, and the reform and opening period that began in the late 70s and early 1980s. Now, China actually played a very important role in transforming National Geographic magazine from a somewhat dry print magazine into the sumptuous blend of words and images that we're familiar with today. Originally, the magazine was almost all text, with only the occasional little diagram or black and white photo in the corner. But there just wasn't enough of that text to fill the whole magazine in January 1905. So Gilbert Grosvenor, who was the editor of the magazine at the time, he had just gotten a trove of beautiful photographs from Lhasa, and he just said, let's just insert them into the magazine as full-page views to fill up the blank areas. And this move proved so popular that from that, with the readership, that from that point on, photographs became a defining feature of the magazine. 5 years later, China was also the first country that was documented in color in National Geographic magazine. When Grosvenor, again, he actually paid a fortune to have hand-tinted photographs of China and Korea printed in the magazine. Now, there was not color photography yet, so this was kind of amazing that they decided that they wanted to have color even before color photography was available. And again, it was a huge hit, and readership and subscriptions exploded when this kind of view was available. Now, while some of the photos from that first color edition, like this one of the gate of Shanhaiguan, northeast of Beijing, some of them showed major scenic landmarks. A lot of them just showed street scenes, and readers were fascinated by these, such as these four Manchu women walking down the street in Beijing. And I think you're all muted, so I can't have a quiz, but the question I would ask if this were a history class would be, how do we know that they're Manchu women? And the answer is because they have normal-sized feet. This was, of course, the era when Han Chinese women of this class would probably have bound feet. And here is just a back alley of Beijing, a man carrying straw and other things on his donkey's back. This was incredibly popular with the readership and made a huge difference in the way the magazine developed. Now, before 1949, there were two main kinds of National Geographic explorers in China. There were the travel writers and there were the scientists. Now, the first group wrote travelogues and they wrote photo essays, and they had titles like Adventures in Lolo Land or Climbing the Mighty Minyakonka. And as you can tell from the titles, Some of these were sort of swashbuckling Indiana Jones type expeditions. They were notable more for their danger or the exotic scenery than for any scientific value. Perhaps the most famous of these was the 1931-32 Citroen Trans-Asiatic expedition, which claimed to be a reopening of the Silk Route for the automobile age. A caravan of cars and trucks, some of them with this half-track design you see on the right, took off from Beirut on their way to Beijing in April 1931. And they took off in high spirits, but they had tremendous problems on the road. They had so much trouble with the narrow, steep, stony pathways through the mountains, especially the Pamir Mountains, that all of the vehicles actually had to be disassembled and put in boxes and loaded on the backs of ponies to be carried into China. So it was a sort of an ignominious way to reopen the Silk Road to automobiles. The expedition was also beset by bandits, sandstorms, floods, and a warlord who was very unhappy that they were driving through his territory without paying a toll. It took them eventually 314 days, but the expedition did finally reach Beijing in February 1932. Now, not all of the travel writers were just out for thrills. Owen Lattimore, for instance, wrote several articles from China for the magazine in the 1930s, and later he became Franklin Delano Roosevelt's chief advisor on Chinese affairs. And during the Second World War, the magazine published a number of articles sympathetic to and documenting China's resistance to the Japanese invasion. The second group of National Geographic explorers in this pre-1949 period were scientists. There were archaeologists, geologists, and especially botanists, the most famous of whom was Joseph Rock, who's pictured here on the left. Rock was sent by the United States Department of Agriculture to China to collect plant specimens, and he was also supported at various times by the Smithsonian and Harvard University. But he became famous for various expeditions in Northwest Yunnan and Western Sichuan that he conducted, sponsored by the National Geographic Society. Now, editors at the magazine struggled to adapt his dry academic writing style for popular audiences, but he took fabulous photographs, like this one on the right, of a man on horseback. You see the tiny little man at the bottom of the screen at the base of a glacier and a glacial lake in Western Sichuan. Now, Rock collected thousands, if not tens of thousands, of plant specimens, but he never actually published any botanical papers based on his research in China. Perhaps because shortly after he arrived in Yunnan, he decided that the people were even more interesting than the plants. He became the leading Western expert on the Naxi people, and his collection of Naxi sacred texts in the pictographic Dongba script that you can see on the right here. It's thought the collection that he personally had and shipped back to the United States, which is now in museums, it's thought to include 1/3 of all surviving sacred Naxi writings, many of the rest having been destroyed during the Cultural Revolution. Returning to our timeline, we can skip ahead to that second period of National Geographic in China after Mao's death and the reopening of the country to the outside. This is a period during which we made most of our $10 million of grants in China. And I'm happy to say that almost all of them were made to Chinese citizens, starting with Zhang Baolai's project to write a guide to the birds of China in 1983. In 1993, grantee Liu Zhi, who is an old friend of mine and probably a friend of Zhang Mei's as well, authored a cover story for the National Geographic magazine with the first ever photos of giant pandas being born in the wild. We've seen a real increase in National Geographic's presence in China, especially over the past 20 years, with the launch of the Traveler magazine, the local edition of National Geographic, a special edition of the magazine on China in 2008, and the first Chinese team at the World Championships of National Geographic's Geography Bee. 9 years ago, we launched an initiative designed to support scientific researchers and an emerging group of applied conservationists in China who are working on critical issues of air and water conservation. With generous support from Jack Ma and the Alibaba Group, we launched the Air and Water Fund in 2012, and it was a program to provide seed capital of 20 or 30,000 US dollars to individuals working on innovative projects in these fields. We assembled a prestigious group of scientists and conservationists in China to help us recruit, evaluate, and award these grants to Chinese nationals. And by 2016, we had awarded around 150 grants through the program. Many of our funded projects leveraged new technologies for research or conservation efforts. On the left, in this picture, you see Zhao Xingfeng and his so-called Fly for Conservation team. They use drones to survey and monitor the main threats to migratory birds and horseshoe crabs along the coastal wetlands of the Beibu Gulf. This is a biodiversity-rich area that's threatened by rapid development, where an estimated 20% of wetlands were lost just between 2001 and 2009. This work is quite revolutionary and is testing methodologies for surveys and monitoring that can reduce costs, save time, and increase efficiency of field surveys of threatened habitats like coastal wetlands. On the right is an innovative, is Zhang Yan, who's pictured, and an innovative low-power mobile sensing platform that she developed and tested with her team in cooperation with researchers from Princeton University. This is a unique and powerful tool to identify and quantify different types of air pollution emission sources through mobile mapping. Now, since we made our last grants under the Air and Water Fund, there have been a few, let's say, interruptions to our work in China. In 2017, the government started requiring that all foreign NGOs comply with a new set of complicated registration and reporting procedures. And it took us several years to get reestablished under those new regulations. And then, of course, just as we were about to start things up again last spring, we all know what happened. And because we're just getting reestablished and don't have a big team inside China, this has put a lot of our work on hold for now. But we were able to find a way around the new rules for foreign NGOs for our big Everest expedition in 2019. The goal of that expedition was to use new technology to develop a 3D map of the entire mountain, and also to install miniature weather stations developed by our labs that would allow us to understand impacts of climate change on Everest, and by extension, to understand how it's affecting the glaciers and the snowpack in high mountains that are such a key source of fresh water all over the world, including in Northern California. Now, we could only summit the south face because we were not yet legally re-registered inside of China, but we collaborated with the Chinese Academy of Sciences, and they sent an expedition to the north face so that we could collectively get the data that we needed for the whole mountain. The findings have been quite remarkable and are appearing now in scientific journals and, of course, in the magazine. So if you haven't subscribed yet, I would encourage you to. Now, just before so we have a lot of plans going forward, and fortunately, just before the pandemic, we were able to sign a memorandum of understanding with the Chinese Academy of Sciences. And this year, we're planning to carry out some of the activities we had originally scheduled for 2020. One that I'm very excited about is a photo camp at the Sanjiangyuan National Park, which I'm sure Zhang Mei has visited many times, and maybe some of you have too. You may have heard Xi Jinping say that what he wants more of is Chinese people telling Chinese stories. And I think he's saying that, rather than be defined by or depicted only by outsiders, he really wants China to establish itself and tell its own story. In fact, in the last 20 years, National Geographic has moved to a model that's really about helping people tell their own stories. and away from our old model of sending, white male adventurers to tell the stories of other cultures. So our plan at Sanjiangyuan is to train park staff and community members to use photography to document their lives and tell the stories of this amazing new national park, which is at the source of Asia's 3 greatest rivers. This project, by the way, is supported by the investment firm Matthews Asia. Thank you so much for listening. I just wanted to mention before Zhang Mei and I start a conversation that when Matthews were considering where they wanted to direct their corporate giving, I think they were attracted not only to this project and to our technical capacity, but I think they also liked the fact that they would be associated with a brand that has the recognition and the history and the reputation that National Geographic has in China. So if any of you listening are interested in a partnership of this kind, my email address is right down there at the bottom of the screen, and I'd be happy to talk with you after the presentation. So thank you again, and I'll stop sharing so we can take some questions.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Fascinating stories, completely fascinating. And you took me back to home, some area. And
right, it was all in your backyard.
I love Joseph Rock's stories. His style of luxury expeditions through the Lijiang Mountains inspired a lot of WildChina style of travel. Anyway, so Jim's email, please reach out to WildChina team. We can, send that to you individually if you need to get in touch. I think this kind of collaboration between NGS and Matthews Asia is fantastic. Really, really look forward to seeing more of such work in China. Actually, before I dive into the questions that I have, I think for this audience's sake, it may be helpful for you to touch upon the difference between National Geographic Society and the National Geographic magazine itself, because many people here are probably familiar with the photography work of, say, Mike Yamashita, George Steinmetz, Citroen. So that would help.
All right. Well, they were the same thing until very, very recently. The magazine and even the channels were developed by National Geographic Society first, way back in the late 1880s and then over time. But in 2015, I believe it was, the society decided that there were some real differences between the nonprofit functions of making grants and developing new innovative technologies for explorers and scientists to use, and doing education work, between that and what was essentially a media company that was producing the magazine and the channels and all the magazines. In fact, there are a number of them. There's NG Kids and Explorer and Traveler and other things. And so what happened was we created a joint venture that was originally with Fox, but that is now with, but that was then, Fox's shares were sold to Disney. So now we have a joint venture with Disney called National Geographic Partners, and the magazines, the TV channels, the online communication, all the different programs, media related and communications related programs are under NGP. We are I think a 27% shareholder. And so certainly when people support the magazine, they're supporting us. And, the society is really in the business now of identifying and supporting what we call explorers. And those are individuals who are documenting and telling stories of and protecting, the wonders of the world. And so we are largely a grant-making organization now, the society. So you could say there's NGS, which is a scientific and grant-making organization, and we also educational. And then there's NGP, which is a media company that we have a share in. But where we have synergies is where does the media company get its materials, right? Where do they get their content? They get it from the explorers who we support. And so, they want to talk to the Lugers and the Jane Goodalls and the Bob Ballards and, the kinds of people who we've been supporting for all of these years. And at the same time, how do scientists and conservationists get action done on the things that they're discovering? They do it by having media outlets. And so there's a great sort of synergy between the two organizations. And then, of course, Disney, with its large presence in China, is very excited to be able to do things like invite National Geographic explorers to speak at events at the Disney parks and events that they organize also, offline at shopping malls and other places around the country. So does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Great, thank you. Okay, now I'm gonna dive in a couple of questions here. Exploration is very interesting. So we talk about exploration on multiple dimensions. There's the geographical exploration, cultural exploration, spiritual exploration, right? And whenever it comes to geographical cultural sense, it seems like every generation is lamenting the previous generation before us have exhausted it, have done it all. Like Joseph Rogg has written the last book about China that's needed, about Nashi. Is this right? I'm sure it's not. Then
Well,
where are the opportunities, the exploration opportunities in China?
Well, I would say that, and I'm being self-critical when I say this, I would say that that reminds me of people who travel to Beijing. I lived in Beijing for many years, and it seemed like people were always saying, "Oh, Beijing's terrible now. It was really cool, 10 years ago, but now it stinks," right? That every generation feels that way, that they discovered the true China. And I think this is a little bit of a colonial attitude that China is there for us to discover and make our own. And I think that part of the evolution of National Geographic and realizing, that the world is so much bigger than a few American guys, wandering around with cameras, is to realize that the next frontier is really valuing and empowering local people's stories. China has 1.4 billion stories. It doesn't have to be a story of China told by an outsider. And so I think this whole drive toward finding how we can, cultivate and support talent inside these places, to tell the stories, I think is really where a lot of the future is. And the same thing is true for the conservation mission of organizations like National Geographic. What we have discovered is that parachuting in, scientists and conservationists is not the way that you save natural areas and ecosystems. Helping local people who have an interest in having forests, having clean water, and yes, having wildlife around them. That's the way to go. So I think that's the change that is necessary, and that is also going to make both organizations like National Geographic, but also efforts like environmentalism more successful in the future. It's really about empowering the local and the rich variety. Just think if Nashi people were telling their own stories instead of some Austrian guy who emigrated to the US telling their stories.
In some ways, it's almost like a complete paradigm shift. I mean, NGS has been on the leading front of expert-generated content in a way, expert-led exploration of this culture or this land. And now it's switched around because of internet, because of TikTok. It's user-generated exploration in a way. That's, if I'm understanding. Yeah,
I think that's one way to look at it. And to be sure, we still have experts in, well, how do you frame a story, or how do you make sure that a story makes sense to external audiences? Because there are all sorts of different styles of storytelling and all sorts of different, venues for doing that, but we still have people who are really good at understanding, well, how would you use a tool like photography, or how would you use exhibitions in a museum, or even documentary film to tell the story you want to tell. So there's still a role, but the role is not defining what the story is anymore. And that's really exciting.
Yeah, I'm going to push on this exploration opportunity a little bit more. Say you personally, COVID's over, no quarantine required, no job, no strings attached. So you have a year to explore in China. What would you do? Where would you go?
Well, I mean, my understanding is that because I'm giving this presentation, WildChina will be taking me anywhere I want to go, right? Isn't that
Yes,
correct?
of course.
Well, as you know, my background is very much in birds, and my personal love is of birds. And there are a lot of wonderful places that were just in those slides that I would love to go to, and even though I spent 20 years visiting Yunnan, visiting Sichuan to do conservation work, and in some cases, even to do research work, most of that time was spent having meetings, in Chengdu, talking with people from the Department of Forestry, making sure that we had that the driver was paid, or that we were agreed on which route we were taking. The actual time that I spent in forests, in wilderness, even in villages with local people, seemed to me like way too short. So I would love to spend a lot more time in southwestern Yunnan, especially. I haven't Tongchong and those areas, western Yunnan, all over Sichuan, but especially in the west. But also the East Coast. I feel like Fujian has amazing places. The Fujian is where the round Tulou villages are, isn't it? Yeah. But frankly, it's been almost a year and a half, and so now I would be happy in the Beijing airport at this point. I am missing China. I'll admit that.
You and me, same. Okay, yeah. And now here's a trickier question, though. I think with the 15 months gap, things are changing rapidly in China versus US, right? And I'm sensing, maybe this is 井底之蛙, like a very limited view, but there's a waning appetite for all things, all stories, China in the US. At the same time, there is a growing sense of pride among Chinese to explore our own land by ourselves, tell our own stories to ourselves. What do you think is really the path forward for NGS to really still continue to explore, to be of a global impact in China context?
As I was saying in response to that earlier question, I mean, I think it's fantastic that people in China want to tell their own stories and explore their own country. And, to the extent that some of that is scientific exploration that is in line with National Geographic's mission, and there are ways that we can help researchers and conservationists in China do that exploring, we would much rather do that than try to have a big team of National Geographic experts on the ground in China. That will never be our approach. We will never have a big China team in the country. We'll always be very small, and we'll focus on really, financial and technical support to individuals in China so that they can do precisely that, explore their own country. As for the issue of waning interest outside of China, I'm afraid you're probably referring to the political climate, especially between China and the US. And I find it incredibly troubling. And I think there are troubling signs of being more inward looking and even xenophobic on both sides. It's deeply saddens me, having, spent almost, half my life there. Well, no, I guess I'm older than that, maybe a third of my life. But I think that in times like this, organizations like National Geographic that are a bridge, and that are a people-to-people bridge, not a governmental or even a financial link between the countries, the kind of cultural and people-to-people exchange that we work on, I think, becomes even more important. We need to keep those lines of communication open. We need to keep learning about each other. And so in some ways, I agree that this is a very hard time to work in and on China. But in other ways, I feel like this might be the most important time to do this kind of work.
Yeah, I share that sentiment. It's not easy. It's like it's harder to find audience now when you talk about China-related projects, right? But it also is probably the most important time to really work on the grassroots exchange. Yeah, I'll dive into a couple of pre-submitted questions. Kyle Oberman, who is a fan of NGS work, he texted me privately as well. And his question is, he's done some interesting exploration work in Hengduanshan as well.
Yeah, doesn't he live in Chengdu? I think he lives in Chengdu.
Yes, he does.
Hey, Kyle.
So his question is, how has the NGS work changed in China to reflect the incredible changes of the last decade in working with local explorers? I think you addressed this over 120-year sort of change. He's zooming in on more specifically the last decade.
Right. Well, we're figuring that out right now, and maybe Kyle has some suggestions for us, because it is challenging. For those people who don't know, part of the drift toward a more sort of nationalist atmosphere is suspicion of foreign NGOs and less willingness to collaborate or cooperate with foreign groups. And in all our work, the main the thing that we would least want to do would be to get Chinese partners or grantees into any trouble inside of China. So I think that always, bearing that in mind as we consider, grant proposals or collaboration ideas, that's certainly one thing that we have to pay much more attention to today than we would have, say, 10 years ago. I think that in very practical terms, and Kyle, will know this because the ins and outs of how NGOs have to work in China. Our professional supervisory unit is the Forest and Grasslands Administration, which is sort of like the Chinese version of the Department of the Interior in the United States, right? They're in charge of parks and wildlife conservation and things like that. So, as we endeavor to start making grants in China again, we want to be in close consultation with them to make sure that what we're doing is helping with their mission of protecting biodiversity in the country, of making sure that national parks are managed well and things like that. So, we're having conversations with places like the Chinese Academy of Forestry, or with organizations that have ties with the Forest and Grasslands Administration, so that at least to start out, we can be making grants to groups that we know our government partners will be very comfortable with. And then the hope is that over time, you build a relationship and you build trust, so that you're able then to work more broadly. And that's the hope. But that's a very good question, Kyle.
Can I ask, the earlier program that is a joint venture with Alibaba that you mentioned, is that grant only for Chinese nationals, or you don't limit nationality applicants?
It was before my time, but I'm pretty sure that the target was Chinese nationals. Yeah, I think that all the grantees were Chinese nationals. And that is, that if that's specified by the, money talks, right? So if the donors say that's how they're conditioned, then that's the way we would do it. Normally at National Geographic, we don't have that kind of strings attached. We really want to support the best projects and the best researchers or conservationists, no matter where they're from.
Okay. Excellent. And for all our participants, if you have questions, there's a Q&A box. Feel free to input them. I still have a few more here. Let's go. Next question is from Meg Maggio. I think from Pick and Fine Arts, our old friend.
Another old friend. Hi, Meg.
So does Nat Geo produce TV programs from China? Who is the publisher of Nat Geo's Chinese edition?
Okay. Yes. As a matter of fact, I was talking earlier about this NGP, National Geographic Partners, which is the joint venture between us and Disney. And the NGP is actually the entity that produces the things like the television shows. And NGP China, unlike a lot of the regional National Geographic partners around the world, NGP China produces a lot of local content. So they do a lot of Mandarin language programming. They do a lot of documentaries and specials that have China-specific themes, like using remote sensing to find lost cities, in the Gobi Desert and things like that. So they're actually quite dynamic, and they're currently under the Walt Disney Corporation. To your question, Meg, and the magazine, National Geographic magazine in China, that is licensed to a company, the name of which I should remember, but I don't. It's licensed to a publishing company that also publishes other magazines.
Right.
So I think it's called Copia Arts, Limited or something like that. And in other countries, it's licensed to other companies. There's actually a National Geographic magazine in Taiwan that is separate, that is also in Chinese. Of course, it's in classical form Chinese, but right. It's licensed to a different company and has slightly different content that is, I think, a little more locally focused.
So all the content of the TV programs and publication programs are produced and edited and run in China. For the Chinese.
Not all. I think that.
I mean, the ones for mainland.
The majority for the TV channels is global, but locally they do generate some of their own programs and things like that. The magazine, I think, is also a mix. They will contract with writers and photographers for domestic Chinese stories. I know they did a big one about Sanjiangyuan a couple of years ago that wasn't in the US magazine. But I think they will also arrange with National Geographic magazine publishers to have the rights to some of the articles from the main magazine. So it's a combination.
Got it. Okay. And Jim, you've got to work Sanjiangyuan into the main magazine in the US.
Yes.
It's beautiful, beautiful destination.
No, I am so excited to be working with them, and I really want the photo training to just be the beginning and sort of a beachhead to start doing more and more collaboration with them, because it's a huge area and it's such a diverse area that I really have high hopes for us making that a key base for our support in China.
Yeah, just for everybody in the room, we actually covered the Sanjiangyuan National Park a while ago, and it's one of China's leading, the first government-sanctioned national park with the title of national park. And we will actually, in next month, we have a session talking about conservation of snow leopard, and hopefully Lu Zhi will join us at that time. Okay, so one more question from Sophia Dooley. She's from the Yanqing Academy of Beijing University. I think we covered some of this already. Is National Geographic China still around, and do only Chinese citizens work for it? I think it's similar. If you want to add anything to it, or we can move on.
I mean, we have National Geographic Society in China. I'm based in the United States right now. We have a person in Beijing and a small office, but we just have one staff member. And she is a Chinese citizen. She's fantastic. Her name is Li Xinfang, and she may be watching right now. So hi, Xinfang. But as I was explaining earlier, National Geographic Society is quite small, but National Geographic magazine and channels, that's much larger, and they have Chinese staff, they have international staff, and they're separate companies.
Right. Okay. All right. So Jack Chen, who also just inputted another question, we'll get to his first question first. Besides Dr. Joseph Rock, did NGS support other early explorers in Southwest expedition? I think Southwest China is Joseph Rock was the only one, right?
No, there were others. I don't know all of the names now, but I know that there were both expeditions. But let's see. In the Southwest, I'm not thinking of other names. But there certainly were a number of other plant-specific explorers who were working on botany. Frank Meyer. So, Zhangmei, you're in Berkeley, right?
Yeah.
You know Meyer lemons?
Of course, I have one in my garden.
Yes, Meyer lemons are named after Frank Meyer, who was a botanical explorer who went around China, including the Southwest. I don't know if he got further. I don't know if he got to Yunnan, but he certainly got to Sichuan and to the Sanxia area, which is very important for citrus fruits. And, we call it the Meyer lemon, but in fact, he didn't invent it. He just found it in China. It had already been developed by Chinese farmers. And it is a cross between the lemon and the mandarin orange. So, there are a lot of different researchers and botanists who were sent to China with support from National Geographic. But Rock was definitely by far the most famous in the Southwest in Yunnan. There were others went to especially to Xinjiang and Tibet and the north, but Rock was the most famous.
Yeah. So Maya lemons, gosh, that's also from China. I know in Berkeley, I find the plants in Berkeley extremely similar to the plants in Yunnan. We have the rhododendrons, all the jasmine, the camellias, magnolias, all different types that whatever I can find in Yunnan, I can find them here.
Yeah, well, they started in Yunnan, and then they were transported over.
I wonder if you're very much at home here. Ming Gao has a question in Q&A. I did not plant this question. I see it. Would Nat Geo partner with entities like WildChina to organize exploration trips for ordinary people, just to increase awareness, grow the next generation of explorers? So thank you for asking this question.
Oh, I'm sure that wasn't planted, but I think it sounds like a great idea. So let's look into that. I know that for instance, the Smithsonian Institution does tours in China, and in fact, I lectured on some of their tours several years ago. National Geographic, I really don't know, how that is managed now, but I'd be happy to ask around and we can talk.
Yeah, let's do that, and then that'll be our next trip.
Yes.
To Sanjiangyuan, right? And Jack Chen has another question. Wonderful question. Fabulous journey and great story of NGS in China. Early days explorers and their expedition are so inspiring. I wonder if you can give a little more color on Rock's expedition besides his luxury style and dry riding.
Well, he was famously crabby and really sort of almost misanthropic. He was unable to collaborate with anyone else, and he would occasionally, and I don't think he ever learned Chinese either. He would occasionally invite other people along with him on his exhibitions, but generally he would kick them off just a few days in because he would get tired of them or irritated with them. You might have heard of Edgar Snow, who wrote Red Star over China. When he was just I think in his 20s, Rock invited him along on one of his collecting expeditions. but he only lasted a couple of days before Rock said, get out of here, you bother me. So he was a very crabby character. He generally tried to, although he had this great love for the Nashi people and their culture, he always, aside from when he was posing for pictures in local costume, day to day he wore the business clothes and he had a phonograph record, and he tried to eat as the most Viennese food he could manage. So he was quite an unusual guy, and as I said, he was sent there to be a botanist, and he ended up not doing any botany. I shouldn't say not doing any botany. He collected a lot of plants, but he didn't actually write monographs, based on his research, because he became so enraptured by Nashi culture. So he's quite an interesting character. I mean, Zhang Mei, you may know more than I do because you spent so much time in Lijiang and his turf, but quite an interesting character.
Yeah, no, I visited his little house at the foot of the glacier, and you could just picture him being there. I admire his sort of sense of curiosity and perseverance in pursuing a subject. And Nashi language is not easy, right? It takes a peculiar kind of personality to get that far. Very interesting. Thank you. And if there's more questions, please put them in Q&A, and then I'll go back to another question here. What advice would you have for anybody who wants to get involved in NGS grants, obtaining NGS grants and exploring in China?
Check the website. We have, if you go to ngs.org, that's the National Geographic Society website, not the magazine. Then there should be a drop-down menu that says something like, what we support, or grants, or something like that. And we support grants a couple of different ways. One is there are several, sort of perennial themes, things that we care about, like wildlife conservation, right? Discovering and protecting rare species, things of that nature. And then occasionally we'll have a request for proposals. So we'll have a special, some special issue will come up, and we will say, we're seeking proposals only from these countries and only on this topic. So, and the website will always tell you what the latest opportunities are. We recently had a request for proposals related to COVID and nature protection, because as a lot of you might know, when COVID happened and everybody was inside and the cities went quiet, a lot of strange things happened. Like in some cases, you had wildlife coming back into the cities. People were seeing, dolphins in Venice, and there were all these unusual things happening. Well, there were also things happening in protected areas, right? Places that might have a lot of tourist pressure, like Yellowstone, all of a sudden had none. And what did that mean for, migrating deer or pronghorn antelope or whatever? So, we had a something called the COVID Science Grant, asking people, are you interested in doing research to see what are some of the, positive and maybe negative effects of the COVID pandemic and the response to the pandemic on wildlife. And we actually have a very interesting proposal from China as well for that RFP.
On that, would you have any advice for the Chinese explorers or explorer wannabes? Because if they send in an application to NGS, honest chance it's probably harder than getting into Harvard to be noticed, right? Do you have any advice for them, regardless of getting grant? How should they do their career or dream, or should they just ditch that and then go get a job with Alibaba?
Well, I mean, I think the the largest obstacle right now is not necessarily National Geographic. It's more National Geographic Society having permission to give grants in different fields, and the level of comfort that our government supervising agency would have with us giving money to a third party. So we're working on that right now, and I hope, I mean, I would love to get to the point in a couple of years where we're making a lot of grants in China again, but it would be difficult to do something like the Air and Water Fund again, given the new foreign NGO management law. So I would just say, first of all, that's the biggest obstacle. The second thing is, you know, not everybody is suitable for a National Geographic grant. And so you really need to think carefully about what you want to do and look at what the requirements for the grant are. And I think a lot of people sort of talk themselves into applying for things that maybe they're not the best person for, and you can waste a lot of time going after funding in fields or subjects where you might not be the most qualified. But at the same time, I mean, I really would say that, you know, most grants that are turned down, it's because there are problems with the way that they're written and people have not paid attention. You know, it's like when I used to teach, you know, people don't always read the instructions, right? It's not that people aren't smart, it's that they just don't bother to read the instructions. So I would actually urge people to just read and think very carefully about what the requirements are before applying. But you're right, it's a challenge. And for this COVID Science Fund, I believe we had over 1,500 applications and we're going to give out 10 grants. So, you know, it is harder than getting into Harvard.
Yeah. And I think even more than the process of getting the grant, nowadays, it feels like life is very busy. Unlike the romantic Joseph Rock era, where people are more free to, somehow the cost of living is cheaper, you're more free to be an explorer, as if the cost to them was not as high as the cost to us today to pursue that lifestyle. And I wonder, you know, how young explorers feel about that. Okay, a practical question. Please, where can I see Joseph Rock's videos? This is from Charlotte Elton. Joseph Rock's videos, are there?
I don't think there are. He died in I think he lived until maybe the early 1960s. He retired to Hawaii. But I don't know whether he even took any film, much less videos. So I'm afraid I don't know. Zhang Mei, do you know of any? There must be some biographies of him out there, but I don't think there are any videos.
No, I don't know of any. In fact, I think I'm curious, where can we get a compilation of all his writings for National Geographic magazine? Around 25, was that when he was there?
Yeah, a number. Well, he was in China from 1920 all the way up till just before 1949. He left a couple of times during World War II, but he was there for something like 27 years altogether. During that time, he wrote a number of articles for the magazine. So again, I would say if you have an online subscription or a paper subscription to the magazine, you automatically get access to an archive, a digital archive of every edition of the magazine from 1988 to today. And it's amazing. That's where I got, you know, half of my slides, because you could go in and read every one of Joseph Rock's articles and see all of his incredible, he documents entire Nashi, like shamanistic rituals and weddings. He did an amazing amount of work. And so, you know, I think, again, I work for the society. I don't work for the magazine, but I have to say that it was a pretty amazing bargain to be able to get access to all of that online for such a small amount. So even if you just subscribe for a short time, you could go into the archive, read what you want to read, maybe download some stuff, and then and then end your subscription.
Thank you. This is the insider tip only for the WildChina community.
Right. Yes, it's the life hack for National Geographic.
Right. Can you say leak any information on any other major exploration of NGS that's coming up?
I can't. I hope that maybe we will have something, as exciting as the Everest expedition, if not more, that we can talk about and maybe even have a program about with you within the next 6 months or so. So, watch this space, everybody. We do have interesting things happening in China, and because of the complexities of the political situation, I can't talk about all of them all the time.
Well, very exciting. So stay tuned. Please come back to our Zoom programs and we'll have more coming up. Any parting words? You want to say a few words before I go into logistics closing?
No, I would just say I do really look forward to the time when we can all be going back and forth. I think the people-to-people connections between the US and China are so important, whether they are people curious about WildChina who go with your company, or explorers or readers of the magazine, or people from China coming here to study and explore. So thank you for providing this kind of bridge. And like I said, it's great to see you. Hope we can have some delicious Chinese food in Berkeley or in Minnesota or in China sometime soon.
Look forward to it. Can't wait when we can all get back on the road. Thanks so much, Jim, for taking the time. Yeah. And just everybody give me hang there one more minute. I'll talk a little bit next week. We have a live virtual travel event visiting Yangshuo. So we'll be talking to our rafting guides on the river. We will be going to some of the local little boutiques with a guide live. So join us for that event. And also in June, we have a talk on snow leopard, which I hinted at earlier. And for June's book club, we'll be reading Drunk in China. It's a book about Chinese baijiu. It'll be quite entertaining. And we have a new podcast called the China Travel Podcast. And you can subscribe to that anywhere on all the streaming platforms. Thanks so much. And I hope to see everybody again at our next event. Thank you, Jim. See you back in Beijing or Berkeley.
Bye-bye.